Welcome to Strip Sports Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. It is Wednesday. Dane Moore, podcaster extraordinaire who podcasts about the Wolves often, will join me in a little bit to talk some Timberwolves, talk return of D'Angelo Russell, and what to pay attention to over the last 21 games of this season. But first, what did I miss? Okay, you guys, Twins are undefeated, at least in my mind, or at least in the games this season that are not governed by the most asinine rule in Major League Baseball. And I'm not just here to complain, but here's the thing. Twins have won all their regulation games this year, 3-0 in those games. Couple of routs among them, but 3-2 is what the record says they are in the standings right now, because they have lost 2 extra inning games, both of them being of the runner on second, no outs, start to the inning that MLB implemented a couple years ago. So here's the deal. They lose one on Tuesday to the Tigers in that fashion. Akil Baddoo gets the hit for Detroit to win the game, makes it hurt even more. That's a former Twins prospect that they lost in the Rule 5 draft this past offseason. He's looked really, really good so far early this season. The opener against Milwaukee milwaukee lost in similar fashion. Remember, after Alexander Colomé blew the save, the Twins went on to lose in that extra inning when Milwaukee got the run with that head start and runner on second base. Here's the deal. I'm not just here to complain about rules, but I think it's a bad rule. I think it's a silly rule that doesn't fix the problem that it's really intended to fix, which is in large part that games last too long. That's a Major League Baseball problem, and it's not just going to be solved by one thing. But you can do better than this. A pitch clock is the thing that's really going to help the game. If you can't fundamentally change the way players are playing right now. They're taking more pitches than ever. They're fouling off more pitches than ever. They're willing to strike out, take walks, work deep into the count. That is naturally going to make games longer. It's going to slow the pace of the play down, and let's be clear too, there's 2 different issues. One is the pace of play, like how fast the game moves, and one is the total length of the game. Pitch clock helps with both of those things. Pitch clock keeps things moving. You put a 20-second pitch clock in there, as they did in the minor leagues. 2014 to 2015, they switched that up in the minor leagues. Average length of the game during that first year jump from 14 to 15 was about 10 or 15 minutes less. That's a big deal. As someone who has gone to a lot of minor league games where the pace generally was better anyway, that pitch clock makes a big difference. The game moves a lot faster. Now, Major League Baseball tried to do this in 2018. Players Union didn't want to do it. I don't know why. For some reason, maybe they're the only workforce in America that's lobbying for longer workdays. I don't know what the deal is, but they didn't want to do it. It still hasn't happened yet. Maybe on the horizon at some point here, but it's still not in effect. So you've got these long lags between pitches. I think it's gone up to like 25 seconds in large parts between pitches now. You cut that by 5 seconds, you cut off like 15 minutes per game. I'm not even kidding you. 15 minutes per game if you can get the time between pitches down just a few seconds. So why not do it? So anyway, that's my pitch clock rant. Back to the original rule, which is just a bad rule, right? It just totally changes the game. I get it that you want to speed things up, but you know what? 98% of all games finish in 11 innings or less, so you're not playing a whole lot of extra innings anyway in almost every game. That's per Fangraphs. So you're not really solving a problem. You're solving a problem for a very small sliver of games, and like 7 or 8% even go into extra innings at all. So it's not really solving a big problem. It's solving a small problem, and it's not even really solving it in a good way. It's solving it in a way that changes the game fundamentally. The only way I can see reconciling this, let's go to hockey standings. Let's have extra inning games count as overtime or shootout losses. I'm on board with that. Let's say the Twins right now are 3-0-2, and the beauty of that is, of course, just like hockey, you don't count the overtime wins any differently. They just go into the win column, so it looks like you're even better than you really are. So that'd be great. 3-0-2 is the Twins' unofficial record in my book until we get this whole thing solved. Transfer portal, subject of mine that I love, but Gophers, my goodness, are losing players faster to the portal than they're gaining them. Liam Robbins now in the portal. That is 8 players in the portal, including 5 guys who started last season. Pretty much anybody who regularly contributed for the Gophers last season is in the portal. It's Gabe Kalsher, Liam Robbins, Marcus Carr, Jamal Mashburn Jr., Trey Williams, like everybody who you thought, wow, that person could help them next year is in the portal. A lot of work for Ben Johnson to do, the new head coach, but he's been active in the portal. He's gotten 3 guys so far, but 3 is smaller than 8. He's going to have a lot of work to do to bring in new players, whether it's incoming recruits, whether it's transfer portal guys. But right now, boy, unless he's able to keep a couple of those players that went into the portal, say, hey, I know you're interested in trying something new. Maybe I offer you something new. It's going to be a long year for the Gophers next year. So Ben Johnson's got his work cut out for him. He's done a good job in getting players from the portal so far. We'll see what else he has up his sleeve. But man, Liam Robbins would be a big blow to lose him in addition to everybody else.
I'm Nyla Jean Myers, Senior Assistant Sports Editor at the Star Tribune. Thank you for listening to Strip Sports Daily Delivery. This work is made possible by our Star Tribune subscribers. For unlimited access to the articles mentioned in this podcast and our coverage of Minnesota sports from pros to preps, go to startribune.com/subscribe.
Happy to be joined right now by Dane Moore, covers the Timberwolves, does his own almost daily Timberwolves podcast. You guys think I talk about the Timberwolves a lot on this show, which covers all Minnesota sports and beyond? Can you imagine 5 or 6 Timberwolves podcasts a week for a 13. I don't want to cheat him of a win. 13. Don't want to cheat him of a win. They did win Monday night, 13-38 team. But he does a great job of it. Somehow makes it interesting and relevant. Dane Moore, welcome to the show.
Thanks, man. It helps when there's relevant things happening. Not always good things, but if there's all you need is a little bit of news, right? Somebody injured, somebody makes a leap. There's been, for a bad team, there's been a surprising amount of stuff to talk about with this team this year. They find a way to be messy and interesting.
That's absolutely true. And that's, people, I get some of my friends, like my group texts, they're like, you talk about the Wolves too much. And then some of them are like, more Wolves. So it's like, it kind of goes back and forth, but it's like when you're in the media business, sometimes it's not the team that's doing really well that's the most interesting, or even the team that's like, kind of good, like the Wild. They're interesting to me kind of right now more than they are in most years, but they're not messy. They've had a few things happen and there's some little bit of drama there, but the Wolves, like, they hired a coach 5 minutes later from Toronto. That was cool. Or
even just last night, like,
yeah,
you have this like 30 minutes where the fan base is euphoric about, D'Lo coming back, and then boom, press release, Malik Beasley's out for 4 to 6 weeks. It's like, it is the nature of the Timberwolves, not just this season, but historically, to be, a tease. Like,
yes, absolutely. So, you mentioned Beasley, so I jotted down a few things. Maybe we'll start there. He's out 4 to 6 weeks, hamstring. Kind of seemed like it came out of nowhere. Just one day he was on the injury report, and then he's 4 to 6 weeks, which could be, if you math it out, they've got 21 games left. 4 to 6 weeks could, on the far end of that, could take you pretty close to the end of the season, if not all the way. How much does that hurt what they want to see? Because I feel like the emergence of Anthony Edwards makes this less of a, oh man, now we're never really going to find out, or we still don't know what this looks like. But having another shooter, I guess, in that lineup too gives you a different sense of how this all fits together. So what's your impression of how big of a deal this is in terms of them being able to establish if this is going to work going forward?
Well, I think to start, you have to say it would work better, more effectively with Malik Beasley out there, of course. But in a lot of ways, the rest of this season is not necessarily about effectiveness, right? Like, we know the wins and losses don't matter at this point. And so, to that extent, an upgrade of Malik Beasley making 40% of his threes over Jake Layman making 34%, like, you want that, but it doesn't really matter. So I think of all the top players on the Wolves that could be hurt and removed, Malik is the one where you can take him out and the team still makes the most sense. You can still run a cat post up, right? And skip the ball over to the other side of the floor, and it's Jake Layman or Jalen Noel shooting that shot. Is it going to go in as often as Malik would? No. But you still get to see that action play out, right? You get to see the Cat and D'Lo pick and roll, and somebody start. It's the kick part of the penetrating kick is not going to be as effective, but at the same time, you get to see what it looks like. So we're going to have to not necessarily obsess over results, I think, from this standpoint of like, oh, what is the effectiveness of the pick and roll? Like, it's going to be better when Malik Beasley is out there rather than these other guys. I think the only thing that could like get in the way is if you start needing to play a Josh Okogie or a Jarrett Culver in those minutes. You know what I'm saying? Because now you have a 25% 3-point shooter, and maybe they are not even going to take it at all, and it just kind of shuts the whole thing down. But generally speaking, they should still be able to run their main things through Cat, D'Lo, and Ant, and just have more shooters around them.
That's a good point, because you're right. As long as you have someone who is enough of a threat that they need to be accounted for, like a Layman or a Jalen Noel, and Jalen Noel is kind of a poor man's Malik Beasley to a certain degree anyway, as long as he comes back relatively healthy relatively soon. But you're right. Where it could break down is you put someone who just flat out can't shoot. The defense doesn't honor that at all, and then you don't really get a sense of what would this look like with at least a decent shooter. And Towns doesn't get hard doubled every single time or something like that, where you're at least seeing how things look with a functional shooter in that spot. So I suppose that makes some sense. It's just a kind of a bummer, I guess, that you just as long as we've been talking about this, it's been kind of Towns and Russell that you've really wanted to see together, and they'd only played 5 games together since the trade until Monday night, and hopefully they get 21 more at the end of this year. But Beasley kind of became part of that, and I think to your point, Anthony Edwards was maybe becoming a bigger piece of, we want to see what these three look like together, and we did see that in that first game back Monday, and we saw a win. And what was interesting to me is they weren't particularly efficient in that game. Those 3 guys, I thought they played pretty well. They had the points, the rebounds, the assists even were there across the board, but none of them shot over 50%. Russell was like 7 of 19. He still had the highest shot volume. That was still took
24 minutes too.
Yeah, I know he didn't start, but he got his shots. But I guess, Edwards didn't do a lot he didn't have a ton of usage, at least from what I thought in the final, in the final minutes. D'Lo kind of took over a little bit of that fourth quarter and with some effectiveness. What do you make of that dynamic and how that's going to play out, especially in, closing situations where Edwards was kind of learning and growing before Russell came back?
Well, Rand, I mean, you don't need 3 closers. Like, at the end of the day, like, is it good to have a third option? Sure. But like, Ant has popped at times in clutch time this year, but he is not going to be in a more effective closing option than Cat or D'Lo could be. So I honestly don't think it's that big of a deal. Like, have Ant do what he's been doing in that Knicks game, in that Grizzlies game, like, activate yourself, right? Play the passing lanes, get those steals, get those offensive rebounds. Like, that's your role. And then play off of the Cat and D'Lo dynamic there. I mean, we saw basically right in this last game in the fourth quarter where it was, D'Lo moved into the spot that Ant had been. They kind of run that little horn set up there where it's Rubio, Cat, and Ant in the past, and now it's D'Lo there. And so what the shift is Ant ends up moving to the corner. I think the biggest thing Ant is going to need to do, because that's not going to just be fourth quarter, so that's going to be all the time, right? Is like, he needs to stay in his head when he's in the corner, which is like a boring spot on the floor, is to understand that like he's one pass away from being the guy, raise up, catch the ball, attack the hoop, get your pick and roll out of there. But I think a big problem, and why the net rating, I think, of the Ant and D'Lo minutes back at the beginning of the season was like -16. It was terrible. Is that it was so baton passing, right? From D'Lo to Ant. I think about that Oklahoma City game where it was just D'Lo over and over again. And Ant, and part of that's on Ant because he wasn't activating himself from the corner. He's just kind of sitting there waiting. So he's got to learn what that looks like. I mean, you would assume that a number 1 overall pick, right? How much time in his basketball life has he been like, you're the 3rd or 4th option here. Why don't you go stand in the corner? Like, that's a learning process, but it's critical because that's going to be beyond this year. Like, this is the core. And you are not always going to be, the number 1 option on this team this season or next.
And that's a good point too, because it's like, I think we think of development as you've always got to be the guy, or you've always got to, if we're thinking about the last 21 games and, he's not going to maybe get the same, high leverage opportunities in the fourth quarter or closing games and have the ball in his hand and running screen and roll with Cat. But you're right. If you got enough of those guys on your team, you don't have to always, you have to learn to play another way in the fourth quarter. And, I guess the bigger question, though, is that with development, you were seeing a lot from Edwards, and even McDaniels was more of a non-factor offensively Monday than we've seen him for a while. He had kind of, for a couple games when Beasley was out, he was almost a third option offensively, which was, interesting to see how he could progress that way. And, he was doing a lot of, you go stand in the corner the other night, right, and he only got, I think, 5 shots, and some of that was foul trouble, but
I was going to say that. Yeah.
Some of it was, overlapping minutes with a lot of guys who want to get shots up. And there wasn't a whole lot of guys. There's nobody else who was double digit shots, I don't think, in Monday's game. So do you worry, I guess, big picture, about development when you've got these, you've got the 2 cornerstone, the quote unquote, mid-20s veterans back, in high usage roles, especially late in the game?
I don't really. I think it's like we're all very confused as Timberwolves followers that, of what normal basketball looks like. I mean, that's what it looks like to be the 3rd or 4th best player on a team. Like,
right.
You sometimes you don't get it. They should and will learn that. We're just used to the 4th guy or the 3rd guy being Wancho or somebody from,
right,
passes. I'm trying to think of like a different name, but it's okay. It's okay to be a low usage guy, and you're still going to get your spots. Like Ant is still going to get his. I mean, Ant's taken 20 shots a game since Finch has been here. Like that's not gonna go down. He can still get, plenty of opportunities to, to work his game. It's not going to all get deleted. Like Jaden is going to have his opportunities to catch an attack or just catch and shoot. Like it's not going to be the exact same volume, but we're not talking about like hacking off,
no,
in half there. So you're a rookie, like earn it,
right.
to some extent. Ant hasn't earned 20 shots a game, and
right. He's been more efficient lately, I would say.
Sure.
So, he's getting to that point, but you're right. We're not used to having 3, let alone 5 guys who can, potentially score on the floor at the same time.
It should make them all better. That's the thing. It's like we think about, we go, okay, what do they have to sacrifice for each other? Well, sometimes in sacrifice, you find efficiency, and I don't see why that can't be the case with this group, because, how many times has Ant had to force a shot this year? How many times is Cat forcing his way through a double team? Are we late in the shot clock and someone's jacking something up? Like having more good players on the floor is a good thing.
Right. I think the question that we're going to see unfold over the last 21 games is, how do those good players fit together? Is there synergy, or is there are the collective parts better than, or are they less than the whole? So with that in mind, first game, there was some good things. They only gave up 106. If the worry was defense, they got away with some things, probably some shots that didn't fall, but also, a pretty good defensive showing. They've had some better defensive showings. What globally, as we think of Russell back, Rubio back, by the way, did they mention how this medical miracle of guys going from doubtful to in ever transpired? I missed the post game. I missed the lead up to that.
It's another Timberwolves miracle with the injury report.
Yeah. So I was a little curious about that. How you go from, I guess you hedge a little bit if you say doubtful, but questionable seems like a better place if you want to play that game. Anyway, I'm
not touching that.
No, and that's all. I'll go there. You don't have to. But what from Monday felt sustainable or able that they could replicate versus what felt like, I don't know if they're going to be able to do that on a night in and night out basis?
Well, I would say globally, to use your word, competence, right? Like the problem with this team this year has been in about half the games in the first half, maybe the second quarter, they get punched in the mouth, right? And it's a team gets hot, they make 4 or 5 threes, something like that. And boom, here we go, double-digit deficit. By the end of the second quarter, it's 20. Game over at that point, right? And what they haven't had, they're never going to have the defense with this roster to be able to make that punch not happen. They don't have the personnel to be able to slow that down. So you counter that with offensive competence, right? And that's by having guys around Cat, because their counter basically has been, all right, we need now, if they're going to get hot, the other team's going to get hot, we got to go to Cat. Well, what are you going to do if you're the other team? And like, they're obviously going to go to Cat here. So let's just double and force the ball out of his hands. And, that has worked. You stifle the Wolves, you get them down by 18, 20 points in the first half, it's over. That is incompetence. Not having another option of a player to go to is incompetence. And now through, the progression of Ant, through D'Lo being back, and just a group of guys who have played in the league. I mean, I think back to the beginning of the year or like kind of the middle of the year, and Jared Vanderbilt's kind of out there and kind of feels like the veteran, right? Like, oh, he's, like he's been in the NBA before. Well, Jared Vanderbilt had played like 49 minutes in the NBA before this season, And so you're signing up for incompetence.
He felt like a throw-in in last year's trade, and all of a sudden he's playing like heavy
starting.
Yeah, why not? Sure. Jared Vanderbilt, why not?
So I guess to answer your question, I think competence can be sustainable. And that's not a high bar, but that means games over these.
It is kind of a high bar, Dane. Let's be honest. It's a high bar.
Okay. All right. Well, I just think that a goal for this team needs to be in, close to all 21 of these games. So you can actually learn about them. That was the most frustrating thing, I think, covering this team is you go, okay, the second half doesn't matter, right? Like they're down by 20 some, whatever's going to happen. McLaughlin's going to have 16 points in the second half because it's garbage time, like they need that from a team building standpoint to learn about this group. So I think that we're going to have 4-quarter games, at least 3-quarter games. I think that is going to be big for this team. As far as like what we saw on the floor, that can be, do I feel confident is going to consistently be there? I mean, right. The two kind of things are that D'Lo played shooting guard the whole time, right? He was on the floor with Rubio or McLaughlin for 23 of his 24 minutes. Do I think that's sustainable? Is that the best thing? I don't know. I mean, like to some extent, it would be great if like off-ball D'Lo becomes a thing. That's huge, not just for Rubio and making him have some value, but Ant, as Ant next year takes more of a progression. We're seeing Ant as more of a lead ball handler, right?
A combo guard at the very least, yeah.
So if he's a combo guard, like you got to have somebody who can combo with him. And so to have D'Lo, make that work, I just don't want to react to last night and be like, okay, we're good. Like
right.
we've got our 2 guard now, because we have 25 games from the beginning of the season where the minutes with D'Lo and Rubio were a disaster. The minutes with D'Lo and Ant were a disaster. Like D'Lo was better when he was purely playing point guard by himself. Now a bunch of variables have moved around. Like maybe off ball D'Lo is a thing. I don't want to just stamp it and say like, we're good here. Like this makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't. Cat and Nas was another one last night. They closed the game together, but at the same time, I like Nas, but I'm like, okay, we got it. Power forward, check. Like, no,
beat Sacramento. You can beat anybody. You can dodge a wrench. You can dodge a ball.
Exactly. So I don't know. I mean, it's these things again. That's why I think these last 20 games are important. Like string together a chunk of 10 games where D'Lo's the shooting guard. Show me what you're able to do in that time. Show me what 100, 200, 250 minutes with Cat and Nas looks like together. Like those are the things we need to be able to learn from this team. This front office needs to be able to put a grade on those type of things. So you can say when the draft comes around, when the offseason comes around, what is the need? What are we doing at point guard? How, like, what is our plan here? Is Rubio staying? Is Rubio going? How bad of a need is power forward? Is Cat a power forward? Like these are the things that you can compete with. That's not tanking to try different things in that way. They could be actually have benefits, but it's time to test different things that might actually work. And I'm curious. I really think like for the worst team in the league, like it should be an interesting last 20 games.
Yeah, for sure. Last kind of thought as we wrap up this segment. You alluded to the draft. We've alluded to, what's at stake here in these 21 games. I'm of the mind that the Wolves, Gerson Rosas, in their wildest imagination, did not imagine that they would be 13-38 right now. That there's no way in the world that you do a trade with such a light protection on a first round pick without thinking that you're going to be at least like flirting with the play in, or, at least if you're giving it up, it's going to be in the 8 to 10 range and not potentially 4 or 5. So I don't think they went into the season thinking, oh boy, we got to make sure we lose. And nobody does, but I don't think in their wildest imagination they could have envisioned having the worst record in the league right now. That said, a lot of what they're going to do going forward feels like it sure hinges on whether that 40% hits or not. How do you think they balance that as they think about going forward? I mean, organically, they just might finish in the bottom three anyway. But as you think about,
pretty organic thus far.
It's been pretty organic thus far. Yes, we think. And so, what do you, as you think about that, how important do you think maximizing their chances at that 40% is versus winning as many games and as possible in these last 21?
Well, two things. So the bottom, you can have the worst record,
right.
The second worst record, and the third
right.
worst record, and you have 40.1%. That, you don't have to be the worst.
A lot of teams got worse at the trade deadline, though. They're going to start creeping up on the Oklahoma Cities and Detroits of the world pretty quick here.
But what I will say is you fall to the fourth worst spot, and you're still 36.6%.
Right.
You slide down another spot, it's like 32.5. Like, that's the opportunity cost, right? What is this? Is it worth competing for 20 games, to lose 8% on your pick there? I mean, I don't know. Somebody better at math would have to calculate that, but it's not totally punting on your odds of keeping the pick by trying the rest of the way. But to your broader point here, right? The 40.1% and this pick is massive. It's absolutely massive. This team is, I've said forever that I believe the Rosa's plan was 2 years of this, then you blow it out in 2021. And, you just kind of looked at the rosters, the contracts that he inherited when he was here. You add a little bit of age to over the course of that time. Like 2021 is the time. That's where this team, makes their push to go for the playoffs and to actually start competing. Now, having that asset in your pocket completely changes what you can do. You compare, if you get a top 3 pick and you attach that to Malik Beasley, like you're in the conversation for a lot of different things. A top 3 pick, attach it even Rubio, whatever. Like get creative on the trade machine, however you want. You got money to go buy on the trade market. Like that's big. Now there's another mini path off of here that says, well, do we want that top 3 guy on our team?
Right.
If you got the number 1 pick, are you trading Cade Cunningham and punting on the idea of Cade Cunningham and Anthony Edwards going forward, or choose your Evan Mobleys or Jalen Suggs, whatever?
Right.
I mean, it's a fascinating conundrum. It's a good problem to have, but really you start setting up this thing. Are we trading this asset to improve the Cat and D'Lo core, or do we lean into being young? And what that eventually, what that could mean, if you have Cade Cunningham and Anthony Edwards on your team's not going to be good by the time Karl-Anthony Towns' contract is up. That's just the numbers game. But you think Cade Cunningham is, or any of those guys, it's going to be like Edwards, right? The first year is going to be slow. Like
Maybe.
Even Luka, man.
Yeah,
it took a full year.
Some guys just come in and they do it right away. I don't know. You're right though.
But what are the odds?
Yeah, right. The odds that someone comes in that young and just, nobody is LeBron. Like it's going to happen once a decade that someone just comes in and is like, you're 19 and you just light it up, and there's no doubt about it. But they got to keep the pick in the first place. So,
but it's just there's good problems to be had if they hit that pick. If they don't, then there's just problems.
Exactly, because then you're it feels like the difference is, because I feel like they'll be better next year no matter what, if they do or don't get this pick. We say that every year, and it maybe won't be true, but so you're talking about the difference between getting a top 3 pick this year or maybe getting like a number 8 or 10 pick next year, if that's where you are next year. And that's a pretty big gap, especially when you have such a deep draft. So much to figure out over these last 21 games. You're right. For a 13-38 team, there sure is a lot of fascination here. You'll cover it extremely well on your podcast. I appreciate Dane Moore, you jumping on Daily Delivery and providing some of the insights here as well.
I'm glad to see you, put down the pen and put on the microphone, man. It's welcome to 2021. It's a whole new game.
Whole new game, baby. All right, Dane, see ya.
Let's end quick with the cooler. Twins home opener Thursday is weather permitting. I see a 100% chance of rain right now, so we'll see if that game is actually played. Twins versus Mariners at 3 p.m. Thursday. One thing that is not weather permitting, though, sign up for a Twins live event. I'm hosting it at noon on Thursday. StarTribune.com/sports has the sign-up information. I will be on with Roy Smalley, plus Star Tribune columnist Lavelle Eniel III and new Twins beat writer Megan Ryan. Check that out, sign up, and we'll have a good time talking Twins before what we hope is the home opener with 10,000 fans in the stands on Thursday. That'll do it for me today. We'll also talk Twins on the podcast tomorrow. Phil Miller joins me to set up the first homestand, what happened over the first 6 games of the season, his impressions of being out in Milwaukee and Detroit. Thanks for joining me today on Daily Delivery. I'm Michael Rand. Write a review, subscribe to StarTribune.com, do all that good stuff, and we'll catch you again on Thursday.